everyone. Thank you all for joining this monetization panel today. Actually, before introducing myself and our amazing panelists today, I'd just like to incentivize you guys to all interact with us using the Wova platform. It will be really nice to hear from you. And also, if you have like any questions, I will make sure that we'll have some time to answer them at the end of this panel. So I'm Cecilia. I'm the head of monetization here at Kwalee. And today I will be hosting this panel with Ignacio, co-founder and COO at Extreme, and Dilpesh, director of product SDK at Moloko. Welcome, guys. It's really, really great to have you guys here today. Thanks for joining me in this really exciting conversation. Can you please maybe start by introducing yourselves, telling a little bit about your company, positions, and everything? Maybe Ignacio, can you start?
Sure, of course. Thanks so much. And first off, of course, thanks, Kwalee, for having me. It's great to be participating in these conversations. Like you mentioned, I'm Ignacio Ortiz. I am the co-founder and COO at Extreme. We are essentially an ad tech and ad operations company. So what we do is we offer mediation for the most part, and then we offer associated services, or clients can essentially offload anything to do with ad ops, and anything, yield optimization and so on, to our teams. And then for some clients, we also do single point of payment services. So we help them with the collections. We are a fairly young and fast growing company with a ton of opinions. So happy to be here.
Cool. Dilpesh?
Yes, I'm Dilpesh. I'm from Moloko. I'm the PM for the SDK at Moloko. As some of you guys might know, if you don't know, Moloko is the largest mobile DSP, leveraging kind of the cutting edge machine learning. Before Moloko, I was actually on the publisher side. I happened to actually work at Kwalee at one point in time. And my experience has basically been working in gaming and ad tech companies for the last 12 plus years. And thanks, Kwalee, for having me. I'm sure it's going to be an exciting conversation.
Nice. Thanks again for joining us. And let's start. Maybe let's start talking about ad optimizations. So essentially, the ad monetization world is now completely different from what it used to be like a couple of days ago, a couple of years ago. And one of the biggest changes, especially in this matter of optimization, waterfalls and stuff, is the addition of in-app bidding. So I've heard many different opinions about this. We have like people that love it, love the free time that they have to do other stuff, and there are people that completely hate it. They kind of miss the control they have over this. I am in this last group, I guess, but I would love to know your thoughts on this. So Dilpesh, what do you think? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What do you think?
I think from a demand standpoint, I think going bidding is actually beneficial for players like Moloko and kind of other programmatic buyers, which is what we've always been living in, right? So I think bidding is actually beneficial for us. We see efficiencies on bidding. In many ways, we have to adjust our algorithms based on bidding versus waterfall. So having consistency is actually better for us, right, from a bidding standpoint. And also we see better performance and signals that come through bidding. If I take a step forward, like, I don't know, let's say, 3 to 5 years from now, like, if, at some point, we're hoping through the ORTP protocol, we can get, first party data, right, which is more consistent, can be more consistent channel for sending, these sort of kind of signals as well, right? So overall, like from a Moloko standpoint, bidding is actually beneficial for programmatic buyers. From a publisher standpoint, I can understand why losing the control, right, is painful. But I also feel like at some point in the near future, right, once we have more bidders or more bid density, I think publishers will ultimately benefit from higher bid density and competitive pricing. Right now, we live in this weird hybrid model. I think it's accelerated since some of the bigger partners going bidding only, and I think that acceleration will only be quicker. So yeah, I mean from both demand side, it's beneficial, but on the publishers that I think they might be beneficial, will benefit this in long term. But now I can understand why some publishers, hate not having that control, right? Yeah, Ignacio, I don't know what your thoughts are, kind of.
You can see me smiling.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, it's when we think about the split of like how should studios think about this, I think the right answer is we shouldn't care. I mean, we should just go for whatever is paying studios the highest amount of CPM, and that's kind of what we strive for at Extreme. We are, of course, because I was listening to your initial answer, and by the way, I've known Dilpesh for a long time. A huge amount of respect. This guy is outstanding and highly technical. Of course, coming at it from the studio standpoint, we understand why it is better for a lot of the bidders and probably a lot of the advertisers. And maybe in the long run, you are right. So we are, of course, very focused on providing as good a service as we can and kind of finding as many optimization opportunities within bidding as possible. That said, I mean, I think in the short run, what we have seen so far and likely will continue to see is a drop in CPMs in addition to the loss of flexibility. So there is a concern around that. And when we look at how our business is running today, we still see higher CPMs in waterfall. Of course, there's the market share that goes into waterfall is decreasing because, as you say, many large partners have transitioned fully into bidding. But as much as we are agnostic as to where the traffic goes, if we see higher CPMs, we will continue to favor a waterfall management if we can get a little bit of extra juice from it. In addition to that, two final things I'll say on the matter is, on one hand, the gray area I mentioned, I think is interesting because, as you know, the business model changes, whether it's waterfall or bidding. So how mediations charge essentially is different. There's mediations collect money when it goes into bidding, but not necessarily when it goes into the waterfall. So I think that during the gray period, there is an incentive issue that it's very important to be mindful of. Just making sure that the management of the strategy around selling the impression is conducted in a way that actually favors the studios. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I would say is we spent a lot of time looking at what we call the latency budget. So we really care about how much time does the app have before it actually needs to show the ad to the end user. And if there's 60 seconds, 90 seconds, then while bidding is of course faster, we actually prefer using all the extra time to find, if we can, higher CPMs. So that's why we actually appreciated the waterfall setup. Of course, we work in hybrid. And like I said initially, I do think the shift to bidding is happening whether we like it or not. So, there's a ton of focus there.
Yeah,
and
sorry, I just want to just quickly. I think the acceleration, right, is driven by some of the larger kind of towards bidding, right, driven by some of the larger networks, who are traditionally kind of in the waterfalls, right. So I think we've seen this as well, even for from a local, right. We can actually buy effectively also on waterfalls. It doesn't mean that we don't buy effectively on waterfalls, right. When the price, I think one of the biggest problems we face as industries, not just a local problem, right, is also understanding if the bid request is coming for the same impression or not, right. We're basically essentially competing sometimes against ourselves, and that's actually to the detrimental of the publisher, right. So if we understood that the request is from the same impression, then we can actually bid more accurately, right. In an event where we've lost so many signals, let's say, especially on iOS, we can actually effectively bid as well. So I think there's also a structural change that needs to happen on bidding and water, to basically allow us to understand from a buy side, it's a single impression that we're bidding against, right? So there's I just want to make sure that I add that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Really, it's really interesting to think about all this stuff. But as you mentioned before, from the publisher's perspective, it could be like a bit tricky or at least challenging to have like this hybrid setup, at least for now in this period that is kind of a transition. Do you see that there's like a perfect balance between waterfall and bidding? I mean, in terms of share of voice, of impressions, revenue, and all this kind of stuff? Ignacio?
I mean, not really. Like I said, so currently, if we look at our business, maybe I guess throwing some numbers might help. what we see, and I took the time to look this up because I was looking at our business today this morning. And so essentially, if you look at it by impressions, currently we have 48% of our traffic going into the waterfall. When you look at it by revenue, it's 59. So you can see the difference in CPMs when you look at it that way. And that it stands true even if you kind of split the bidding into server to server versus client to server. So we do continue to see outperformance on the waterfall side. And if that's the case, then we'll continue to favor it. I don't know that there is like I said, given that our business model is one where we charge a percentage of our clients' ad revenue, we don't really care where it goes as long as it is the best, right? The highest CPM. So that's it. I mean, hopefully bidding a ton of what Dilpesh is saying, of course, makes a ton of sense. And if over time we can kind of iron out the issues that bidding currently faces and CPMs go back up, then that's great. We still feel that it would be great to control the move from a studio standpoint, as opposed to kind of seeing the move happen and kind of having to tag along, which is my sense of what's going on right now.
Yeah, I think we see a very similar on the buy side as well. Like, we see almost a rough 50% depending on genre and sometimes and publisher as well. But we see a rough almost a 50-50% split between bidding and waterfall, how we spend the budgets. But it's moving more towards kind of bidding, as I said, more and more networks become bidding only. And also the platforms, right? Some of the platforms have a mandate to become bidding only by end of the next 12 months. So I think that shift will accelerate even by end of this year to more kind of bidding. I mean, what I've seen publishers do is they use waterfalls as a way to basically put some auction pressure on the bidders, right? So making sure that you set prices at as high as possible, right? And try and see if the bidders can outbid, right? And this has always been a problem, right? Where I'm not saying mediation platforms are dumb, but I think bidders are just more smartest, right? They're much more smart at buying, right? So I think when you have this hybrid world, you need that pressure, right, to come from somewhere, right? And I see publishers basically using waterfalls, to kind of put more pressure on the bidders, right? And hope, but if more bidders become, more networks become bidding, that pressure becomes kind of less as well, right? So but yeah, for now I think we're still on this 50-50. I've seen some publishers say they have 70% bidding, 30% waterfalls, and the shift is moving moving very, very quickly towards bidding.
Nice. Yeah, that's something that we see like really, really clear on the publisher side as well. And you guys both mentioned CPMs a lot. Do you think this would be like the go-to metric to check the performance of a bidding or a waterfall? What do you think would be like the best metric to check the performance is as we expect or as we want it to be?
In terms of like, so I think CPM will still be what your publisher will, ultimately, when you take individual networks, right? That's what, that's the communication, they want to, we still see that's going to be the kind of the key message, they want to drive with the different demand partners. We always encourage people, publishers to look at the opt-out, right, as a big metric, right? You can have, a lot of fill rate, but if the opt-out is much lower, then does it actually make sense? Is that the metric? CPM, is that the metric you should be looking at, right? So we look at like what is the business metric. When we look at business metric, it's more towards kind of opt-out. And look, I think the fundamentally is one of the things I want to also mention, is fundamentally even on the buy side, especially on iOS. I think there is a shift happening towards supply side, supply side having more control over time. We don't have the control right now. That's why we're having a discussion. But I think there'll be tools, soon, I'm hoping soon, where the supply side actually controls. And the key reason over here is, traditionally, buy side has had the advantage of having, let's say, IDFA on iOS, right? So we're able to build, identity graphs and bid, accurately. We've lost those, the signals are very hazy, right? So CPMs naturally have gone down. I think in the long term, I think when you look at how does publisher supply side benefit in this, at the end of the day, publishers have the first party data, right? it's about segmenting those users right in the right way and evaluating those users, right? So if you have segments of users you believe that are worth X, right, then the demand side should be paying Y, right? But I don't think we have the tooling to enable publishers to kind of segment the users, right, and have a unified way. And that's why in some ways bidding is actually beneficial, because you can actually send your unified taxonomy of users, right, to the bidders, and we can all then bid, in a privacy safe world, right? Right now, those tools don't exist.
Yeah, maybe the one thing I would add on the CPM, because I fully agree on the fact that ARPDAU is probably the most important metric to look at. We actually, when we run A/B tests with new clients, we focus on, I mean, of course, we pay a lot of attention to CPMs for obvious reasons, but we tend to focus on ARPDAU as the key metric, because it is at the end of the day what actually moves the business. The biggest issue I have with CPMs, honestly, is the price at which an impression clears is, let's say the price itself is a commodity, right? You're getting paid X amount and money is money and that's it. But of course, the ad that you will show to your user is not necessarily always alike, and you are not agnostic as to what is being displayed to your user base. So to some extent, ARPDAU takes that into account. A very short example is we actually ran an A/B test once where we got into trouble because the CPMs that our client was seeing were lower, and yet when he looked at revenue, it was higher, and he was saying, why are you showing more ads? And we kind of ran through the numbers, and ultimately what we found is we were favoring networks that were showing shorter, like that were just kind of had a shorter time to close. So ultimately they were seeing one more impression per session, and that ended up resulting in a higher ARPDAU despite lower CPMs. So you do have these kind of unusual scenarios where that comes into play. And I think ad quality plays a part in that. So that's why I think CPMs are relevant when you're optimizing and you're looking at how the networks perform versus each other. But money is not the only variable that the studios are taking into account when they add ads.
Yeah, cool, definitely. Cool. So moving now to mediation platforms specifically. This is going to be fun. We all, of course, care a lot about all the supported networks. If it like support custom networks, does it have like a good report? Does it have like a good cohort report? What about the A/B test tool? Is it good? What about latency? Is it like good enough? Ignacio, in your opinion, what's the most important thing to pick to choose to pick the best option?
I mean, of course, I have a mediation, so I'm extremely biased in my answer. But I'm actually going to say something which I think might be surprising to many. Because it's definitely surprising when I talk to potential like investors and partners and so on. Over time, I don't think. So the reasonable way to approach this, in my opinion, is that mediation is actually a tech layer that stands in between. It's almost the pipelines, it's infrastructure. My view is that it should become more of a commodity. I think like all the companies that we compete with have outstanding talent on their roster. So if we came out with a like just mind-blowing feature, my impression is that they would be able to replicate it, and soon we would compete again on a level basis. Same should happen to margin. If margins were disclosed, then over time people would choose the right margin. And of course, that would mean that performance should at some point be the same, because ultimately, I think right now people will look at, of course, performance. I think we're selling ads to make money. So if you're not getting more money, then why are you here? And that is, of course, a crucial key KPI. Like I said, I think over time, it shouldn't just be about the money, because we should be able to compete that away as we should margins. Over time, I think the focus ends up being on the amount and quality of the support that the studio gets. Of course, everyone should have access to all the demand partners. So again, because that would impact performance. So that shouldn't be an issue. But I understand that I'm talking about the ecosystem I want, not necessarily the ecosystem I have. Today, I do think that a ton of things come into play. I do think support, one of the things we find is that, like, you hear me rant about mediation, both here on LinkedIn, people have seen it, and on bidding in general. But the truth about our business is that since we offer ad services like ad ops, the less amount of time that it takes to manage a bidding process means that we've actually been more successful than we expected in selling the ad optimization services, right? Because people don't think it's core, so they send it our way. So it's not that bidding hurts our company per se. It's just that it kind of moves things around in a way that we don't necessarily feel is best for our clients. So when I talk about today, I think some people are very dependent on ads ROAS campaigns, and some mediation platforms may be very successful at offering that out for whatever reason that I won't necessarily get into today. Other mediation platforms might have a different advantage. I think we offer performance, we offer extremely good quality, and I think those two play a big part. But again, I think going forward, hopefully, if we succeed in our mission to kind of open the ecosystem and make it compete in an extremely fair way that benefits the studios, then performance and margins tend to even out, and it becomes more a matter of how you talk to your clients, the sort of analytics tools that you can provide, support, and so on.
Yeah. Look, if I'll try and answer this in a both biased and unbiased way, because I actually had a mediation platform, not so long ago as well. So I kind of agree with some of the stuff that's really been mentioned. I think, look, I'll try and answer from both demand and kind of, let's say, publisher side, and kind of my personal views on this as well. And I think on the demand side, I think what we'll, when we look at, how, what we want, I guess, right, from industry is getting data and supply parity, right? So if everyone can bid on the same impression, same level of data, same level of supply, it's a question mark, right? Like, whether are we getting it? It's very hard to verify that, right? So, when we look at, like, when we look at from a demand stand, we want basically those parity, right? Like, we would love to bid on every mediation platform, but they're all kind of different and they have different approaches, right? But I think what we really care at the end of the day is the data, at least data parity and supply parity, right? So making sure we're getting the same supply, same data as the mediation platform itself, right? In terms of, like, when you go about choosing a network, a mediation platform, I think you mentioned, you kind of mentioned a lot of the stuff, I think, one of the things that, it makes a lot of tons of sense, when we're looking at evaluating mediation platforms, is the A/B testing capabilities, because ultimately, in the world that we're losing control, A/B testing is the only one of the few tools that publishers actually have in order to kind of, have that control and then see if we can actually drive more. And so when I mean A/B testing, I don't mean just A/B testing waterfall versus bidding. I mean going deeper down into granular A/B testing, right? So some of the stuff that we previously tried was, hey, can you make the waterfalls faster, right? By having a longer waterfall, right? You're testing refresh rate for banners, right? Like, and even testing longer form video, right? Like, the idea is, of course, mostly people believe that longer form video means it means that the retention gets but, like, how do you prove these things, right? So I think A/B testing, having platform that can offer much more granular A/B testing and segmentation, right, can actually be a beneficial for publishers, right? And I think that's should be one of the things that publishers should always kind of look at. And of course, I think the other thing is making the whole point of having working mediation platform makes your life easier as a game developer or an app developer. And the ecosystem play is important. So connecting to MMPs, making sure you can send events back to MMPs which you can report. So having a holistic view, on kind of how you're spending and how you're monetizing. So those are, like, important factors, I would say, when choosing a mediation platform. And of course, like, I think we're getting to this, most mediation platforms now offer demand density. So demand density is very important, making sure we have in the same or more demand as the other mediation platform, because you don't want to be left alone, in terms of bid density.
That's nice.
Maybe, sorry, maybe the one thing I would add is, because I was listening to what you were saying, and I agree. I think that a ton of times the place that the mediation offering holds within the entity that is offering the service plays a big part in understanding where they will essentially invest, right? Where they will try and develop new features, what they will focus on. And with one of the concerns that we have with the ecosystem as we see it today is that, given that mediation has mistakenly, in our view, been offered as a free service, then the companies that, for the most part, offer mediation platforms don't look at the studios as their clients, because they are not being paid by the clients. So the money is coming from the advertisers. And as long as that's the case, then it makes sense that the money will flow towards the network, or it will flow towards whatever makes that business grow faster and better, as opposed to whatever the studios need. And I think when I look at the evolution of the industry over the past few years, because this is, of course, a growing trend, one of the concerns I have is that this is playing out exactly as you would have expected if you had kind of guessed, again, a few years ago. I do think studios need to focus on what is driving the business of the platforms that they use, because incentives matter, and they will. I mean, when we came out, and I'll talk about us because I don't want to talk about any other companies. But when we came out with waterfalls that were automated on the fly on a per request basis. We're doing the same thing now with bid floors. So dynamic bid floors, which our system will automatically kind of look at what you're selling and decide what networks should get what bid floor within the auction. And it's something that not everyone else is offering. And frankly, we're, I would say, extremely good, but we're not the only extremely good people out there. This could have been done way sooner. The fact that it wasn't developed, and it's an extremely useful tool for studios, is just because it didn't make sense, because it didn't grow the business of the people that were offering the service. So maybe an additional answer, Cecilia, to your question would be, when you're looking at a platform, definitely look at what is driving its business, because that will essentially tell you a lot about how it will conduct itself and where it will invest towards the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I know you both mentioned lots of stuff already, but considering the big guys in the market today, I mean, we don't really need to say names or anything. What do you think is the main pain point that we have?
You mean,
are you referring
from the publisher's perspective?
Sorry. Okay, yeah, Dilpesh, go.
I think one of the, again, this is, one of the things I constantly hear is, I think coming back to what we started the conversation, is control, right? Like, how much control do I have, and how much control, the platforms are willing to kind of cede as well, right? Like, how much are they, willing to kind of give up, right? I think that's one of the things, I've been hearing a lot, and it can be very simple stuff. Like, I just don't want, a specific network to be the first impression, right? That's understandable, because they might have created that or game adversaries that actually does make sense for that game, right? And so that's one of the things I keep hearing in the market, that hey, I wish there's a bit more control, even simple controls, right? Even having ability to set bid floors, right, per network, per segmentation. That's as I said, it's a big kind of thing. I know some platforms now trying to make kind of have those capabilities. I think we're kind of slow. I think it's very the innovation on that front is a bit more slower than we kind of hope, right? But generally, I think if I look at from ultimately, right, is the transparency. Like, hey, like, if you remember 3-4 years ago, a lot of gaming companies actually were happy with MoPub, right? Even the lack of innovation didn't deter them. And one of the reasons which was the case was transparency, right? They were like, hey, look, I know I can build a business on top of MoPub because it's open source. A lot of things were transparent. I don't think everything was transparent, but there was a lot more that was transparent 3-4 years ago, right? So I think publishers demanding the same kind of standards with the current players in the market.
Yeah, I agree. I think focus. I mean, I mentioned focus before. I think control, Dilpesh, that you bring up is crucial. There's no real reason why studios should give up the control that you're referring to. Like, why is it that it's so hard to get bidding floors and price floors in place, or even to be able to conduct post-bid if you think it's going to improve your CPMs? Like, you should. It's your inventory. So I do take issue with the limitations on the flexibility, I think, that are being placed currently on the market. When you talk about transparency, I think that has to do with two things. It's a simple word, but it involves a lot. On one hand, I do think it would be reasonable to have access to all auction data, to all the bidding partners that are participating for every single request. Like, at the end of the day, these are the data points that underlie the studio's business. So it makes sense that the studio should at least be able to see them, right? And audit them and see how they work and decide what to do with that. If it's for optimization, if it's for control, whatever it may be. There's also the issue of, much like I think mediation platforms should not be a demand source because it creates a bias in how they conduct themselves, or potentially could create a bias in how they conduct themselves. I also don't think that they should be making games, because you have a ton of access when you run a mediation platform, and you should be very mindful of I mean, even if you do set up Chinese walls, it's very difficult to understand when things come into play and when they don't, and how things move around. So as a studio, I would be concerned. And I know that we were, when we were part of Edermax, it's part of the reason that we ended up making our own internal mediation system back then. So knowing who's using your data and how it's being used, I think play a big part. And then finally, of course, I brought it up, I hinted at this earlier, I think ad quality is a pain point. So being able to address in a more serious way. I remember in Barcelona recently, I was attending a panel and the people on the panel were saying, well, what we do is when we find that X network is giving us, bad quality or doing whatever that it's not supposed to do, we shut it off and then we get a call and we tell them, don't do that again. And then we, start them up again and they don't. And that's great if you're a large studio. Of course, the person on the panel was a large studio. I don't think that's possible for a ton of like medium-sized, profitable studios that create a ton of quality games. So having more levers in place to be able to control that, I think would play a big part and is a big pain point for studios today. And it's also hurting with this, I'll close, the industry in general. I've had a ton of conversations where people are concerned with adding advertising into their games because they feel that the quality is not there. They don't control what's going to happen and they risk hurting their user experience. If we were able to control the ad quality, then perhaps we would have a ton more studios and a ton more games being open to saying, you know what, I'll do this because I can actually control the quality. And it shouldn't be that hard.
But what maybe slightly where I would disagree is, some of these platforms do offer this at quality products, right? We can actually see what's actually running. They can, like especially. So I think the industry has improved a lot, from maybe I would say 3-4 years ago, where it was really bad. I remember having a lot of kind of nightmares, as a publisher, and like trying to figure out who's actually doing the auto redirect, sorry. And so I think things have improved a lot, and I think thanks to some of these platforms, right, who basically have able to. But yes, I agree. Like to some extent, there is a lot that hasn't been done, right? Like say like, hey, how do you switch off a problematic campaign network when you're a small player, right? They simply don't have the lever to kind of do that, right? So I think there's a lack, but I think like just reporting and surfacing some of this data, I think we've got
there's been efforts made. I agree. I mean, there's been companies that were acquired that try and offer this service, and I know that it's not easy. I look at the world from, I guess, a very ambitious lens. So I do think that there's a ton that can and probably, hopefully, should be done.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more question before jumping to the Q&A session. Let's try something different, a different perspective. You both mentioned about building internal mediations or different mediations. We know several publishers kind of going to having the same move. They are already developing or already using like internal solution. Let's say something different. What do you think is the worst part about not being on the big guys in the market?
So the question is whether if it's would I advise someone to build a mediation, and what are the kind of pitfalls and gains, I guess? Is that the question?
Yeah, could be.
Okay. Look, I've built, my experience has been I've built, 2 mediation platforms for publishers, right? And then built my own mediation. And one of the things, one of the key takeaways, is actually having the DNA, like from a gaming perspective, gaming companies, or an app developer, is having the DNA. I've seen many companies attempt to do it, and it always falls, flat because, there's not enough DNA. At the end of the day, if you go to your management layer and say, hey, I want to spend $3 million in building a mediation platform, right? It's an opportunity cost, right? You either build that or you build a new game that can actually generate you, 10 times more revenues, right? So it's the trade-off is big, in terms of investment. And also this is a constant investment. It's not like, this is, of course, it's cliche what I'm saying, but you're constantly managing, this, full-time, it's a full-time job, right? I would say, at the minimum, you need about 6 to 10 people, right, to just manage, maintaining a mediation. Even when you move to bidding, there's tons of stuff, there's infra costs, and also you have to do, understand like, there are privacy and ecosystem changes that you have to manage, make sure that your partners you're working with on the SDK front are also compliant. Tons of stuff, that takes time and effort and takes resources away, right? That's the bad part, I guess, right? Or why you shouldn't be doing it. The good part is, of course, that there is a marginal gain, right, on owning a mediation platform. And then some stuff we talked about, like creative control, making sure that you feel that it's everything's done in the right way, transparency. Those things, those are kind of benefits of basically having a mediation platform. But a lot of times I've seen companies trying to attempt it, and now we're seeing a trend where certain demand partners are not going to bid on your platform, so your bid density is all of a sudden becomes an issue. So how do you kind of manage? And with big platforms, they've gone through the pain, they've done the kind of the hard miles, right? So I feel like there are I think like internal mediation platforms 3-4 years ago were very attractive. Now with the maturity of market and now maturity of bidding, it to me it feels better to kind of work with some third party platforms like 3XM, right, where you can actually then help kind of almost navigate the ecosystem changes and and focus on building games and optimizing kind of your games.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say it would break my heart if someone else tried to build their own internal mediation as well, because it is just a very big, expensive, time-consuming endeavor. And I mean, ultimately, I agree with there's a ton of reasons why you would want to do it, because I agree with Dilpesh, all the things we've already covered. But in order to really be able to execute on all those things and have all these cool features and have all the flexibility and put them in place and test them and know that they work, again, it takes a lot of time. So if you build your own internal mediation, you're not doing it because you want the bare bones, scrappy mediation that you actually want the full-fledged, extremely flexible mediation, which is very hard to get. It's very hard to make it work. We've seen large companies try and fail. So building mediation, I think, is a challenge, which, it's best that you really reflect, think about it a lot before you jump in. That said, when we decided to launch Extreme as an independent company, the reason that we did it is because, like Dilpesh mentioned, a ton of the large studios have actually gone out and built their own and still use their own. So it does show that you can actually do that, and there is a marginal gain to be had, in addition to all the other like quality of support and whatever it is that we may, ideally sell. So when we decided to launch, actually, the reason that we decided to do that was there's a ton of companies which probably would benefit from having an in-house mediation, but that should never build one. And that's kind of the people that we want to talk to, because we work with companies where we have an open Slack channel, we talk directly to the engineering team or the product team, and we kind of work together. But to some extent, we act as if we were their internal mediation, and that's hopefully the level of service that they feel that they're getting. So we kind of want to fill that gap. I don't expect Extreme to be the perfect mediation for every single player out there. I don't expect it to make sense for there to be 2 or 3 mediation platforms, period, especially when they look alike. So we're here to fill a void. Kind of, there's a niche of studios which I know would benefit greatly from, considering their own mediation. They'll think about it. They should call us, because we are, I think, a great solution for them.
Cool.
I don't want to pitch too much,
We have only 4 minutes left, so I would just like check the most voted question here from the Q&A session, and it is: do you factor the UA side of things when assessing mediation choice, optimizer, and ROAS campaigns? Who wants to jump in first?
I'll take it, because it's I think to some extent, Dilpesh will laugh, it's almost directed at Extreme. Yeah, for sure. Look, we don't have a demand source, and that comes with pros and cons. From the incentive standpoint, I think it helps. Unfortunately, we don't have UA services, so we don't have ads ROAS campaigns that will, if they're working for you extremely well, then it's tough to give up, and I understand that. The one thing I would say on the matter, though, is, like, ideally, every network, I would love Moloco to have the best ads ROAS campaigns out there, and if they had full access to every single data point out there, then they should. If the data belongs to the studios, then the studios to decide who can train on that data and who can create as ROAS campaigns, and that would lead to a way better world in the future. So I'm not saying that, again, I understand why some studios will need that and they will take that into account, and that's fair. But I do think that it is a problem.
Yeah, look, if you're, that's one of the, I guess, recently that's been one of the key features, right, for mediation platform is, giving, this hook into, and I get, it's, at the end of the day, as a gaming company or a publisher, right, ultimately you have to drive revenues, and margins, right, and if a platform is offering those services, right, I think you have to look at this long term and say, is this something that's, going to continue, right, as there's privacy changes, right? We all know Facebook no longer exists on iOS, right? Like there's a reason why, because there's no data available, right? So as privacy changes, kind of come into even more force, right? Are these platforms able to sustain the same level of let's say optimization or ROAS, let's say ROAS optimizer, right? So yeah, if you look at long term, it's an open question right now.
Cool. I'm afraid we are running out of time, but I think we have time for one more question. The second one, what seems to be the best way to use data to adapt monetization currently in the industry?
Interesting.
So
yeah. So look, so just like on the mediation side, on the publisher side, on the demand side, we don't, we get tons of data, but we don't know what tons of data we don't get, right, from mediation platforms or publishers. I think one of the things publishers can do, right, which I think most mediation platforms offer, is some level of segmentation, right? So I know some mediation platforms offer like, hey, if you have highly engaged users, then you want to basically put a different price floors, right, and then see if we can get higher CPM for those users, right? Especially in a world of bidding, right, when you don't have waterfalls or limited waterfalls, right? Ideally, of course, first-party data would be super useful, but I think we're far from that, right? Because no publisher is collecting that data, or at least passing the data in a form that's unified, for demand partners to kind of bid on, right? I think right now we're limited to just basically having some level of segmentation, and I think the other thing as I would encourage publishers to do is A/B testing. I think having and not simple A/B testing, but much more granular A/B testing, and that can be done outside the mediation platforms as well, right? I've seen some publishers do much more granular testing outside mediation platforms, and they've benefited from using. This is where I would say building the own solution is useful.
Cool. Ignacio, I'm sorry, I don't think we have time for your answer.
I couldn't improve on that. So
cool. Guys, thanks again for joining us in this panel. It was an extremely fun and interesting conversation. So if you could please reply the other questions, we have like tons of them in the Q&A session. And that's it. Thank you.